This conference will now be recorded.
So in the last class, we understood about the array, object class methods, wrapper classes, and we also understood about parsing, how to convert a string into a respective primitive data type using corresponding wrapper classes. Now, I will write one class public static void main. Then I will tell system.out.println main started main ended. Still give the package name com.vikas. Main started, main ended. So if I run, I'm getting the output. Now what I do, 10 by 2. Now let us run this. So we're getting main started, 5, main ended. Now what I do is I will tell system.out.println 10 by 0. Now let us see what happens. 10 by 0. See, main started. Main is not ending. It is throwing arithmetic exception. Divide by 0. Yes or no? So what happened here? The program terminated abnormally. Program terminated abnormally. Clear? We call this as exception. Exception is an event which is triggered, okay, when some abnormal operations are performed. Okay, whenever the exception is triggered, the exception is triggered whenever some abnormal operations are performed. Okay, if there is any exception in the program terminates abnormally. Program terminates abnormally. What is meant by normal termination? Means program will start and program will end normally. Okay, so now let me do 10 by 2. See, program ended. This is called as normal termination. Okay, if all the lines of the program does not executes, if the program terminates in between, we call it as abnormal termination of a program. Exception is a event triggered by JVM when some abnormal operation is performed. If there is any exception, program, and if it is unhandled, then if there is an exception in the program and if it is unhandled, then the program terminates abnormally. See now, main started, main is not ending, program terminated by throwing an exception. So what happened here in this line? Compiler created one exception object, that is arithmetic exception object, and it is throwing throwing. Now what we need to do? We need to handle this exception. If we don't handle the exception, what happens? The program will terminate abnormally. So to terminate the program normally, what we should do now? We should handle the exception. Now the thing is how to handle the exception using try and catch block. Using try and catch block. Okay, let us see that. Okay, what does the try block should contain? A try block should contain the code which might raise the exception. Try block should contain the code which might raise the exception. Okay, here who is causing the exception? The line number 15. So what I will do, I'll keep it inside the exception and I will just print one message. Don't divide by 0. Now let us run it. See, program started, program ended, even though there was an exception. Okay, so line number 16 caused the exception and the exception is thrown. Which exception is thrown? Arithmetic exception is thrown. The respective catch block is catching that exception. If there was no catch block, then the program would have terminated abnormally. To avoid abnormal termination, we should handle the exception. What is an exception? Exception is an event triggered by JVM when some abnormal operations are performed. Okay, what happens if we don't handle the exception? The program terminates abnormally. The program terminates abnormally. How to handle the exception? Using try and catch block. What does the try block should contain? Try block should contain the code which might raise an exception. Main ended. Now let me take one array. So what is the size of an array? 3. Now I will try to add some value to the fourth index. So let me add first the 1th index. I'm adding the value to the 1th index. So main started, main ended. Now what I do, I purposefully try to add the value to the fourth index. Now let me try what will happen. See, we are getting array index out of bounds exception. Okay, on line number 10. So here the array index out of bound exception is coming. So what we should do now? Put it inside the try and catch block array index out of bound exception efficient don't cross the array boundary. Don't cross the array boundary. Now let us see. Program started normally. There was an exception, hence the catch block is getting executed. So then the main ended. Clear everyone? Any doubt on this? How to handle the exception? Main ended. String name is equals to David. Name dot length. Right. So main started. Length of the string is 5. Main ended. Now what will happen? What I do is I will make it as null. Okay, I will make it as null. So what is present in name now? Null. Now let me run it. Main started. It is throwing null pointer exception. Let us check where it is throwing an exception in line number 9. So here we are assigning no problem, but here we are trying to deal with null. Whenever we try to deal with the null, we get null pointer exception. So we should be careful what is the value present in the variable before doing some performance. Now what I do, catch don't deal with null. Now let me run this. See, now what I do, Raju, I'll run this program. See, there was no exception, hence the try block is executing. If there is no exception, the catch block will not get executed. When does the catch block get executed? Whenever there is an exception in the try block, then only the catch block get executed. Catch block does not get executed when there is no exception. When there is no exception. Clear? Anyone has any doubt, guys? Uh, Ten by 2, 5, main ended. Right? Okay, now let me run it. Main started, main ended, no issue. Now I will write one line outside the try block. I'll make it as 5 by 0. Now let us see what happens. Arithmetic exception is thrown, but still, why my catch block is not catching that exception? Because let us see what is happening. Arithmetic exception is thrown from the line 9. Is this line present inside the try block? No. Catch block will catch the exception only if the exception is thrown from the try block. Catch block will not catch the exception if the exception are thrown from outside the try block. Understood? Catch block will catch the exception if they are thrown from the respective try block. Okay, catch block will only catch the exception if they are thrown from the respective try block. Okay, now let me delete this line. See, main started, main ended. So now I'll do 10 by 0. Now don't divide by 0. Why? Because the exception is raised inside the try block and it is thrown. So the respective catch block is catching that exception. Now Now, like, look, guys, here. Main started 5, 10 by 2 is 5. Thank you. And main ended, everything is getting executed. Yes. Now I will make it 10 by 0. Now let us see what happens. Can you see the difference? The line number 16 is not getting executed. Line number 16 is not getting executed. When there are multiple lines in the try block, and if the exception is raised, the lines which are below the line which is throwing the exception will not get executed. Try block can have multiple lines, first point. If there is an exception inside the try block, the lines which are below that line will not get executed. Here there is an exception in line number 15 in the try block, and the lines which are below that line number 15 are not going to get executed. Are not going to get executed. Clear?
So that means if there is another line in the try block, like after the system out.println,
Hmm.
that third line will be executed, right?
Where above?
No, below.
So now there is an exception in line number 15. So all the lines below the line number 15 will not get executed. Why? Because there is an exception in line number 15. I'll show you that. If there is no exception in line number 15, then all the lines get executed. Okay? A try block can contain multiple lines. If there is an exception in a try block, then the lines which are below the line which is causing an exception will not get executed. Clear, everyone?
So if there is like in the try block, like the third line,
Hmm?
if you copy it and paste it on the above the exception, is it going to be
Yeah.
executed?
See, now you become the compiler now. When you execute line number 15,
Hmm.
is there any problem?
No, there is nothing.
There is no problem. Compiler will execute line by line. So it will execute line number 15. Okay. Now compiler execute line number 16. Is there any problem?
Yes, there is an exception.
There is an exception. Now compiler will throw an exception. Now tell me in which line compiler is throwing an exception? In line number 16.
Hmm.
So control will come out of line number 16. Control will not remove line number 15 and come out. Compiler will come out from line number 16. So then the cache block will catch that exception. Okay, now the line number 17 won't get executed. That's it. Here line number 15 is executing.
Okay, so the from the exception, rest of the code in the try block will not get executed.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? A try block can have multiple lines. then the lines which are below the line which is causing the exception will not get executed. If there is any exception in the try block, then the lines which are below the line which is causing the exception will not get executed. So there is an exception in the try block, hence the lines which are below the line which is causing an exception. Line number 16 is causing an exception, hence the lines which are below does not get executed. Does not get executed. Clear, everyone?
Can there be two exceptions in the same try block?
Yeah, I'm coming for that now. Okay, name dot length. Name dot length. Now let us run this. Main started, null pointer exception. Let us see where is the problem. Line number 16. Yes, we are trying to deal with line number 16. So it throws null pointer exception. So there is a, you might tell me, because there is a catch block, why it is not catching? What is this catch block is reserved for? It is reserved for arithmetic exception. So, but what exception we are getting? Null pointer exception. So we should catch even that. Don't deal with that. You might wonder now, because why are we not getting arithmetic exception? There is an exception in line number 17. Because if there is an exception in line number 16, do you think the line number 17 gets executed? No, because control came out from line number 16 only. Okay, hence null pointer exception is getting executed. Clear, everyone? A try block can have multiple catch blocks. A try block can have multiple catch blocks.
But
Clear,
actually
everyone?
speaking, it was okay even if there was no arithmetic exception catch. Even if it was not
Yes,
there, it would have been okay.
correct.
Okay.
Good point. So now what you will do, you will think, okay, anyways, exception is coming there. Okay, let me remove this. So now one good person will come and he will give the name. Okay. Now what you will do, you will go and run the program. What happened now? Main started, name.length 6 is getting printed, and then there is a arithmetic exception in line number 15. Yes or no? Right? We can't predict that, okay, line number 14 will always keep on throwing an exception. It might or it may not, but we should land on the safer side always.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other question, guys? A single try block can have multiple catch blocks. There is no limit. Okay, even if you want to have 100 catch blocks, you can keep on adding catch, 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 catch block. Okay. Main started, main ended. This will cause an exception. Let me write a try block. We have a catch block. Okay. Arithmetic exception. So let me have a catch block. So if you have an array, so you might also get array index out of bound exception. So like this, how many catch blocks we can keep on writing? We can write as many number of catch blocks we want. No one can stop us from this. But we can also do one thing. We can also do one thing. Let us see what is that. We can remove all the catch blocks and we can keep one general catch block. Okay. Now will the line number 10 throw an exception? Yes. Which exception? Arithmetic exception. Is there a catch block to catch arithmetic exception? No. So let us see what it will do. So what is happening? The exception is thrown, the general catch block is catching it. Okay, now let me make it test 10 by 2. See 10 by 2, 5. So now there is an exception in line number 11, which is that null pointer exception. Is there a catch block to catch a null pointer exception? No. So who is catching it? The general catch block. The general catch block can catch any type of exception that is thrown from the respective catch block. That is thrown from the respective catch block. Okay, the general catch block can catch any type of exception that is thrown from the respective catch block. Clear, everyone? Any doubt on this? Now you'll get a question. Boss, if general catch block is catching every exception, why are you keeping a arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, and all? Straight away go and keep a general catch block. No. Why are you doing all this drama? So no. So now I have one question for you. So here we have different messages that are thrown from the compiler. Okay. Now you tell me which is the most irritating message for you in this four.
The first one.
Right? It is not telling anything. It's just telling, sorry, something went wrong. Try later. But what the hell is going wrong? Right? So general catch block, when you put, this is what going to happen. You can't specifically tell what went wrong. You can tell something went wrong. There is no doubt about it. But it is not good to the end users. As a developer, for you the things, the purpose is served. You have handled the exception, your application is working fine. But just think of the end user, how irritating it will be for the end user, right? So in some of the websites you might have seen such things, right? So just straight away tell, sorry, something went wrong, try later. But there are few websites where you have seen they clearly specify what went wrong and what you should not do this mistake. Yes or no? Right? So to avoid these type of message, so we have a specific catch blocks so that user will get a clarity. User will get a clarity. Okay. So now let us try one simple example. This is make it 0 here. See, it is throwing arithmetic exception. Main started arithmetic exception where in line number 12. Why? Because weight is 0. Okay, so we are trying to tell a number divided by 0, arithmetic exception. So now if you put a general catch block, what general catch block will tell, hey, sorry, something went wrong, please try later, or please try with some other values. But if you put a specific catch block, you can put a message telling that, hey boss, please don't divide by 0, or please don't enter your weight as 0. So that user will come to know what is the mistake he is doing. Okay, so that is the reason we go with specific catch block, even though the general catch block can serve our purpose. Understood? Most of the people will be having this doubt. Why are we going with general catch? Why are we not going with general catch block? Okay, because of this reason. Clear? Whenever we are writing a general catch block, whenever we are writing a general catch block with other catch blocks, the general catch block should be the last catch block. The general catch block should be the last catch block. Okay, general catch block should be the last catch block. So if you take this catch block and keep it as a first catch block, it will not compile. This too becomes unreachable. Why? Because any exception thrown from the try block is caught by this catch block only. Okay, so no exception will be reaching these two catch blocks. So these two become completely unreachable. See, error message tells unreachable catch blocks. Okay, why? Because the general catch block will only catch all the exceptions. So if at all you are using a general catch block, then the general catch block should be the last catch block. Clear, everyone? Understood how to handle the exception, that is using try and catch block. Clear, guys? Okay. In exception, we have two types. One is a runtime exception. One more is compile time exception. Runtime exception, compile time exception. Runtime exception is also called as unchecked exception. Compile time exception is also called as checked exception. Runtime exception are also called as what? Unchecked exception. Compile time exceptions are also called as what? Checked exception. Okay. Now let us see what are compile time exceptions. Till now, whatever we saw are runtime exceptions because we were getting that exception only when we were running, not while compiling. Okay, we are getting those exception only when we are running. 10 by 0, when I compile, the code was compiling fine, right? Then by 0, is the code compiling? Is there any error in line number 8? No, but when I run, we are getting an exception. So only we call these as runtime exceptions. Now let us see what is compile time exception. Vikas.txt. I'm trying to create one file, so I'll tell create new file. See, line number 14 is not compiling. Line number 14 is not compiling. Let us see what is the error. It is telling unhandled exception type IO exception. Type IO exception. Unhandled exception. So this is compile time exception. So the compiler forced the developer to handle that exception. It's not that exception is going to be triggered. It might or it may not, but the developer need to handle it. The developers need to handle it. For example, the car company owner can never tell to the government that his car is never going to crash. His car is never going to crash. Can never tell to the government. Government will force the car company owners to have the airbags in their cars. No matter whether it crash or it won't crash, but there should be an airbag for the safety purpose. So the same way the compile time exceptions are. It's not that this method will always throw an exception. Compiler is telling if anything goes wrong, there will be an exception thrown. So you should handle it. If nothing is wrong, no problem. Everything will be beautiful. What if there is an exception? Okay. So let us handle the exception. IO exception. Sorry, I could not create the file. I'll create it. Now let us run this. It's saying done file created. Okay, let me refresh this project. So you can find one vikas.txt got created here. Okay, so now what I do, I will give some wrong path. Now let me run it. See, exception got triggered. So catch block is getting executed. Sorry, I could not create the file. If there is no exception, then the catch block will not execute. If there is an exception, then only the catch block get executed. So now let me run this. See, file created. Why? Because it's a right path we are giving. Okay, there is no exception triggered, but still compiler forced us to handle the exception. These are called as compile time exception. Whenever the compiler forces the user to handle the exception, they are called compile time exceptions. Clear? Any doubt? Okay, guys, then. So then practice these examples today. Okay. So tomorrow we shall see few more examples related to exception. Okay.
I got a question because
Yeah.
can you yesterday or day before yesterday we are talking about the hash code.
Hmm.
What is exactly it is the hash code?
Okay. See, hash code is one integer value. I'll tell you. You have one cow class. This is the heap memory. We'll create the cow object. New cow. The cow object gets created in the memory. And this memory has one number address. Okay. So this is the address of your object. This is the address of your object. So this is nothing but the hash code value of your object.
So is it
Okay.
the object ID?
It's not an object ID, it's an address.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So this is the address of your object where it is stored in the memory.
Okay.
Clear?
Sorry, I asked a lot of questions.
No. Whenever you have a question, clear it first. That is very important. Okay? Don't hesitate for that. Understood now?
Yeah, sure. Really appreciate for your explanation.
No problem. That's my job. Okay, guys, then. Any other questions you have?
No, not now.
Good. Okay, then. So let's catch up tomorrow, guys. Have a nice time. Practice these things. If you have any doubts, please make a note. You can ask me tomorrow. Have a nice
Yeah,
time.
sure.
Bye.